If you've never watched a World Cup before, or you just want to understand why Brazil makes people completely lose their minds every 4 years, this is exactly where you start. Because Brazil's history at this tournament isn't just a sports story. It's one of the most dramatic, heartbreaking, glorious, and sometimes completely insane stories in all of sport. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand every single piece of it. So here's what we're doing. We're walking through Brazil's entire World Cup journey, from the very first tournament all the way up to 2026. Key players, iconic moments, the controversies, the emotional breakdowns, all of it. And there are some facts in here that even lifelong fans don't know, because I've been deep in this history for a while, and some of it genuinely surprised me. So let's get into it. Brazil has played in every single World Cup since 1930. Everyone. No other country on earth can say that. That alone should tell you something about how seriously this nation takes football. But it's not just about showing up. Brazil has won the World Cup 5 times, more than any other country in history. They are the most successful team this tournament has ever seen. And yet, some of their most famous moments aren't victories, they're disasters. And that contrast, that push and pull between glory and heartbreak, is exactly what makes Brazil so fascinating to follow. Let's start at the beginning, because the early years set up everything that comes later. Brazil showed up to the first ever World Cup in 1930 in Uruguay. They were decent, but not dominant yet. Same story in 1934. But 1938 was actually interesting because Brazil finished third, and a player named Leônidas da Silva was their star. He was nicknamed the Black Diamond, and he was arguably the best player at that entire tournament. He led the scoring charts. Most people don't know his name today, but he was the first truly world-class Brazilian footballer, and he laid the foundation for everything that came after him. Without Leônidas, there's no path to what Brazil eventually became. But then comes 1950, and this is where the story gets real. Brazil hosted the 1950 World Cup, and the whole country expected them to win it. They built the Maracanazo Stadium in Rio de Janeiro specifically for this tournament. At the time, it was the largest stadium in the world, holding nearly 200,000 people. Brazil sailed through the competition, scoring goals for fun. The final game was essentially a winner-takes-all match against Uruguay, and Brazil just needed a draw. The newspapers had already printed the victory editions. The mayor of Rio gave a speech before the game calling the Brazilian players champions of the world, and then Uruguay won 2-1. The silence in that stadium is described as one of the most haunting moments in sports history. People cried in the streets. Some accounts say fans collapsed. Brazil's goalkeeper, Moacir Barbosa, was blamed by the public for the rest of his life. People would point at him in supermarkets and say he was the man who made Brazil cry. He died in 2000 still carrying that weight. This moment became known as the Maracanazo, and it scarred Brazilian football so deeply that they even changed their kit from white to yellow and green just to escape the memory of that day. That's how bad it was. But that loss lit a fire. Because what came next was something the world had never seen before. In 1958, Brazil arrived in Sweden with a squad that included a 17-year-old kid named Edson Arantes do Nascimento. You know him as Pelé. He became the youngest player to ever appear in a World Cup final, scored twice in that final, and Brazil won 5-2. The world had just met the greatest footballer who ever lived, and he was a teenager. But Brazil didn't just win. They played in a way nobody had seen before. Fast, creative, joyful. They called it Joga Bonito, the beautiful game. And it genuinely was beautiful to watch. They came back in 1962 and won again. Pelé got injured early in the tournament, but a player named Garrinchas stepped up and was absolutely unstoppable. Here's the thing about Garrinchas that most people don't know. He had a physical deformity. His legs were bent in opposite directions, and doctors had told him as a child he'd never play sport properly. He became one of the greatest dribblers in football history. Brazil won the cup again. Garrinchas was the best player in the tournament, and the fact that he isn't as famous as Pelé today is a football injustice. So Brazil goes into 1966 as back-to-back champions. Pelé is at his peak, and they get knocked out in the group stage. Pelé was brutally fouled in almost every game. The referees did nothing, and he left the tournament saying he'd never play in another World Cup. He meant it at the time, but he came back for 1970. And thank God for them he did, because the 1970 Brazil team is widely considered the greatest international football team ever assembled. Carlos Alberto, Jairzinho, Tostão, Rivellino, and Pelé. They won every single game. They scored 19 goals in 6 matches. The final against Italy was 4-1. Carlos Alberto's goal in that final, a perfectly constructed team move finished with a thundering right foot shot, is still talked about as one of the greatest goals ever scored. Brazil won their 3rd World Cup and got to keep the Jules Rimet trophy permanently. That team didn't just win. They made people fall in love with football. But here's where the story takes a turn, because the 70s and 80s brought Brazil teams that were technically brilliant and somehow kept losing anyway. The 1982 squad in Spain is a perfect example. Many people consider that team the best Brazil side never to win the World Cup. Zico, Socrates, Falcao, Jr. Incredible players. They played gorgeous, attacking, possession-based football and then lost to Italy in one of the most dramatic games of that entire tournament. And the same thing happened in 1986, where Brazil were eliminated by France on penalties in the quarterfinals. 2 tournaments in a row, beautiful football, no trophy. So after 1986, something started to shift. The question being asked inside Brazilian football was painful but real. Was playing the most beautiful football in the world actually enough to win a World Cup? Because Italy, West Germany, Argentina, they were winning through defensive organization, tactical discipline, and structured systems. Brazil kept producing magic and kept finding ways to fall short. And eventually, the people running Brazilian football decided something had to change. For 1990, coach Lazzaroni brought in a more defensive, structured setup. Brazilian fans hated it. Critics said the team had abandoned Joga Bonito, the expressive style that made Brazil famous. And then, in the round of 16, Diego Maradona produced a brilliant dribble through midfield, slipped a pass to Caniggia, and Argentina knocked Brazil out anyway. So Brazil had become more defensive and still didn't win. The worst of both worlds. That failure actually set up everything that came next, because it forced Brazilian football to find a middle ground. For 1994, coach Carlos Alberto Parreira built a team around the idea that skill still mattered, but it had to exist inside a strong tactical structure. The 1994 team had Romario and Bebeto as a strike partnership, and they were absolutely lethal together. Dunga was the disciplined midfield anchor. Taffarel was in goal. The football wasn't always pretty. A lot of supporters complained it was boring. But Brazil won the World Cup in the United States, and it was the first ever World Cup final decided by a penalty shootout. The final against Italy came down to the last kick, Roberto Baggio stepping up with everything on the line and sending it over the bar, head bowed. Italy's heartbreak was Brazil's triumph, and the goalkeeper Taffarel, who saved the crucial penalty before that, doesn't get nearly enough credit for that win. There was also a moment in the quarterfinal that went around the world. When Bebeto scored, he did a baby rocking celebration because his son had just been born. His teammates joined in. That image became iconic. Then, 1998 in France. Brazil made the final against the host nation, and the night before the game, something happened that still has no definitive explanation. Ronaldo, the real Ronaldo, the Brazilian one, who was the best player in the world at the time, had some kind of medical episode. Reports said he had a convulsion. He was left off the team sheet, then put back on it an hour before kickoff. He played but looked completely out of it. Brazil lost 3-0 to France. To this day, nobody fully knows what happened that night. There are conspiracy theories. There are medical explanations. There are stories about sponsor pressure forcing him to play. It remains one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in World Cup history, and if you go looking for answers, you'll find a dozen different versions of the story. But Ronaldo came back in 2002, and this time he was unstoppable. Brazil won the World Cup in South Korea and Japan with a front three of Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, and Rivaldo. Ronaldo scored twice in the final against Germany, finishing the tournament with 8 goals. His haircut, a weird triangle shape on his forehead, became one of the most copied haircuts in football history. Kids everywhere were asking barbers for the Ronaldo. He had promised his dying father he would win the World Cup and score in the final. He did both. That's a full circle moment. That's hard not to feel something about. The 1994 and 2002 wins prove something important. The teams that found the right balance between tactical discipline and individual brilliance were the ones that actually lifted the trophy. 2006 was supposed to be another run at glory. Ronaldinho was the best player in the world. Kaká was brilliant. They had Adriano, Ronaldo, Robinho. But France knocked them out in the quarter-finals, and Zidane completely took the game apart. Brazil hasn't won the World Cup since 2002, and that 24-year gap is something that hangs over every tournament now. 2010 in South Africa, they went out in the quarter-finals to the Netherlands, and then 2014 happened. If you're new to this, you need to know about 2014. Brazil hosted the 2014 World Cup. The pressure was immense, because hosting a World Cup and not winning it would be devastating for a country where football is basically a religion. Brazil's star player Neymar had been injured in the quarter-final. Their captain Thiago Silva was suspended for the semi-final. And then Germany came to the Mineirão Stadium and did something that still feels unreal when you watch it back. They won 7-1. At home, in front of Brazil's own fans. Brazil conceded 4 goals in 6 minutes. Players were crying on the pitch. Fans were crying in the stands, some of them just staring into space in complete disbelief. This match is now called the Mineirazo, a reference back to the Maracanazo of 1950, and it was the most humiliating defeat in Brazil's history. The images of Brazilian fans with tears streaming down their faces went around the world. It was genuinely painful to watch, even if you had no connection to Brazil at all. Neymar had been the face of that entire tournament, the player the whole country had pinned their hopes on, and he wasn't even on the pitch when it fell apart. He came back for the 3rd-place game, cried when he addressed the team, and Brazil lost that one too. It was a national trauma. 2018 in Russia, Neymar was back as captain and Brazil were favourites again. They went out in the quarter-finals to Belgium. Neymar's tournament became more about controversy than football, with his theatrics on the pitch becoming a massive talking point globally. The talent was never in question, but that World Cup didn't go the way anyone in Brazil had hoped. 2022 in Qatar might have been the most emotionally complicated tournament for Brazil in recent memory. They had arguably their best squad in years. Neymar, Vinícius Jr, Richarlison, Casemiro, Alisson in goal. Richarlison scored one of the best goals of the tournament with an overhead bicycle kick that people were really talking about. Brazil looked like genuine contenders, and then in the quarter-finals against Croatia, it went to extra time. Neymar scored what looked like the winner. Croatia equalized in the final minute of extra time. It went to penalties. Alisson, one of the best goalkeepers in the world, couldn't save a single one. Croatia went through. Neymar was photographed alone on the pitch, crying at 30 years old. And given the serious knee injury he suffered shortly after that tournament, there were real questions about whether that was his last chance at a World Cup. So that brings us to 2026. The World Cup is being hosted across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, the first time 3 countries have ever co-hosted a tournament. Brazil arrived carrying all of this history on their shoulders, the weight of 5 titles, the memory of 7-1, the question of whether Neymar is even fit enough to play, the rise of Vinícius Jr as potentially the best player in the world right now, a new generation of fans watching for the very first time, and a country that has been waiting 24 years for a 6th star on that badge. Brazil's 2026 World Cup run came to an end after their knockout loss to Norway, and simultaneously, Neymar's World Cup story has also come to an end. But that might stay you from the fact that this is still the World Cup's most successful team to date. If you've made it this far and you want to go even deeper, I'm thinking of starting a mini-series on the individual players, in this case, Brazil's players, Pelé, Ronaldo, Neymar, Vinícius. So comment down below whether that's something that interests you and you would like to see that. And hit subscribe so you don't miss any of those. And there's a lot more coming. And drop a comment below telling me which moment from this video surprised you the most. Was it the Maracanazo in 1950? The mystery of Ronaldo in 1998? The 7-1? The fact that Garrinchas played with bent legs and became one of the greatest dribblers ever? I want to know what hit you hardest, and it also helps more people find this video, so it means a lot. Here's the thing about Brazil's story that gets me every time I go back through it. It's never just about football. Every time Brazil plays, it feels like the whole country is playing. The joy when they win, the devastation when they lose, it goes way beyond sport. It's culture, it's identity. It's nearly 100 years of history, all showing up on the pitch at once. If you're watching the 2026 World Cup for the first time, you're stepping into something that has been building since 1930. Every Brazilian player on that pitch carries all of this with them. The ghost of 1950, the brilliance of 1970, the pain of 2014, the hunger for 2026. That's what makes it worth watching. Brazil is the most decorated team in World Cup history, and somehow they still feel like they have something left to prove. See you in the next one.